Welcome to the Skeptic's Guide to Investing with Steve Davenport and Clem Miller. Every 2 weeks, Steve and Clem bring you brief investment insights you may not find anywhere else. We hope you enjoy today's episode. Here are Steve and Clem.
Welcome, listeners. Today on Skeptic's Guide to Investing, we're going to discuss Japan, the country, the tourist location, the economy. We're fortunate enough to have Clem Miller, who just returned from a month in Japan, and he's going to tell us all about his sushi, his bonsai trees, and how he is finding Zen Buddhism now late in life. So, Clem, if you were to look at your trip to Japan, was it what you expected? Was it more than you expected? Was it how did the culture and the experience compare to other travels you've been on?
So let me say first that, I've had a couple of previous trips to Japan, but they were both short business trips. And it gave me only the very slightest taste of what Japan is about in terms of an on-the-ground experience. Of course, I've long been, familiar with Japan from a distance, but those two trips gave me sort of a taste of what was on the ground, although not much I could really comment on, but enough to suggest that I should go back and experience it more. And so we went back to Japan. We went to Japan, spent a month there. We spent 2 weeks in Tokyo, 2 weeks in Kyoto. And I'm not going to give you a travel log because that's not the purpose of this show. But I do want to give some impressions that about the society, about the economy, about, how we should look at Japan in the world. And hopefully that, will be helpful to our listeners.
What do you think is, I like to think about spectrums. And if we think about the creative side and we think about the engineering side and we think about, in general, how we describe economies, I've always thought about Japan as being an economy in the electronics, creatively, with all the things they've done in terms of producing some interesting games and other strategies. How does Japan compare in terms of what you expected for, a culture and a society today? Are they the most modern, semi-modern? Where would you put them in terms of their use of technology and how they do things?
So Japan is a curious mix of modernity and absence of modernity. So if you look around, while there are some more modern, just architecturally, while there are some more modern structures, there are a lot of structures that were built in the 70s and 80s, and sort of as Japan was being rebuilt after World War II. So, architecturally, there is a mix. I would say that in terms of technology, I think Japan is extremely technologically advanced. I would say it's more technologically advanced than the U.S. is, except in some of the Silicon Valley type arenas. I would say that in terms of everyday use of technology, they apply it, basically across the board, with a few interesting, curious exceptions. One of which, might be familiar to some of our listeners, which is that, the economy is still largely based on cash. So,
Really?
yeah, it's based on cash. So you have to carry a lot of cash around, or, make sure that you're within walking distance of foreign of an ATM that can access your foreign bank account. And fortunately, they have those at 7-Elevens, which, by the way, 7-Eleven being a Japanese company, Seven & I Holdings, they have these ATMs that you can access. So, but in terms of dealing with retailers, I would say 75% of the time, you actually have to use cash rather than a debit or a credit card.
That's interesting. What type of, are you an Apple person or a
Yeah,
Samsung?
I'm an Apple person.
And did you have any trouble operating?
No. I think the phone worked perfectly all the time while I was over there. So there's no problem with telecommunications.
Connecting to networks or anything like that?
Nope. I think the cash thing is not so much a technological issue. It's more of a social cultural issue, I think, where they prefer to have cash rather than the convenience of even phones, right? In terms of paying phone
You
apps.
didn't tap?
Yeah, no taps. Is largely cash based. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I would also
it's a
say
distrust of the credit.
kind of hard to say. I didn't ask anybody about that, but I think it's it's a very curious thing. You don't see use of credit and debit cards like you would in Europe, for example,
Nice.
or China for that matter. It's there's more of this this cash basis. I would say that it's a very retail oriented society.
Yep.
I would say that Japan, especially in both Tokyo and Kyoto, I think is a very retail oriented society, much more retail oriented than I would say the US is. I think there's an awful lot of money sloshing around in Japan in terms of buying things and retail, and it just
You mean physical retail? Like
Yeah.
It's not like here. I think we're transferring from physical retail to online retail.
Correct. And they do have online, but this is an economy. This is a country that has relatively tight geography, and people live largely in cities,
Right.
and so there's greater access to shops and retail establishments, malls, and whatnot, which are really ubiquitous in Japan. You've got areas in Japan, in Tokyo, for example, Shibuya, Shinjuku, Roppongi, Ginza, Akihabara, which are all areas where you have, intense retail experiences, let's say, and a lot of money is sloshing around those areas, and so it's a very retail oriented economy.
Is it kind of a show me kind of capitalism where people like to show you that they have Gucci bags or things that?
Yes, I mean, I think that's certainly a part of it. There's I think there is everybody talks about, at least in terms of the numbers, about how Japan is an aging society. But if you walk around, you see lots of young people, on the streets, in the malls, and these young people are spending money. No question about it. They're spending a lot of money. And, that may be a factor of a lot of singles in Japan. And the singles, they do have a lot of money. So I think that's certainly a part of it.
How does Japan compare, like, average income wise? Like if the US is at 60,000 average income, what would Japan be?
Well, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it's certainly less than US. And if you look, when you're outside of the real urban cores, even in Tokyo, when you're in sort of outskirts of Tokyo, it doesn't quite look like wealthy areas that you would have, say, in like wealthy suburbs, like you might have in Atlanta or Washington D.C. or even Baltimore, where I am, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like that. It feels much more of an urban core basis with with less wealth on the periphery. I even noticed when if you look out the window from a tall building, you still see lots of TV aerials. You don't see that in the
Really?
U.S. much anymore. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Not I'm sure they have cable in the wealthier areas, but you still have a lot of TV aerials out and about. Which,
How
by
about
the
the
way,
size of your space? I heard
yeah,
everything's very tight.
yeah. Which, by the way, Japanese television, even the Japanese themselves make fun of their television options. So
Mm.
there's not a great deal of love for Japanese television by locals. Uh, which which reminds me to talk about Japanese politics. Uh, I would make two observations there. The ruling party, the Liberal Democrats, just came out with a new president of their party who's going to stand or lead that party into upcoming elections. And his name is Shigeru Ishida, and he's sort of an old guard type LDP. That's the party initials, and he's not well liked among some of the people that
Yeah, it
uh,
seems like a strange leader to pick at this point.
yeah, he's not well liked among some of the people that I met and talked to. The other thing I would say, and there's even some thought that maybe they would lose to the opposition, right, the Democratic Party of Japan, but we'll see about that. The other thing that I managed to pick up, as many of you know, I'm sure Japan still has an emperor, although an emperor without much in the way of any power, and maybe even less power than the British monarchy. But there's widespread, at least from what I gathered, there's widespread dislike of the idea of even having an emperor in Japan. So there's some thought that maybe they should dispose of that. So we'll see what.
Yeah, I mean, don't you feel like that's already kind of happening around the world as the people are devaluing the royalty? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's royalty and there's royalty. In some of the smaller European countries, the royalty is basically just like you and me, right? They ride their bikes around, they go into shops, they don't have much in the way of security. And then you've got, the real royalty, like, in the UK and like in Japan. And, this real royalty, as I would put it, uh, it has been devalued to be sure, but it's still very symbolic of the culture, and so it might take a lot to change that. Now, the emperor, the whole idea of the emperor and the empire goes back to basically thousands of years ago, right?
Yeah.
Where basically the emperor was like a god king within the Shinto religion. Which brings me to another interesting point, which is that Japan, I'm sure many of you know that Japan has its native religion, which is Shintoism. and there are plenty of Shinto shrines around, um, which are definitely worth visiting if you go there. And then there's an overlay of Buddhism, which was imported from China a long time ago, obviously. And so now what you have in Japan is that many people are both Shinto and Buddhist, and there are certain similarities between at least the way the shrines and the temples operate. But both many people worship at both Shinto shrines and temples. And Japan seems to have, I wouldn't necessarily call it, religion in the sense of like monotheism. Buddhism is much more of at least from what I understand, much more of a philosophy than a religion, as we would understand.
Yeah, it's a practice, really. I mean, it's a practice on how to live your life, isn't it?
Yeah. And I would say that and then Shinto has a lot of nature worship elements to it.
Right.
So if you so those two are not necessarily inconsistent. So you could have Shinto beliefs and you could have Buddhist beliefs. But
I think it's interesting that in most countries, if we have two different religions, they fight for superiority. But
right.
Japan is such a community-based that if there's another religion, they start to say, well, what are they doing that we're not doing? And maybe I can incorporate it. I mean, it's a very philosophically open
Right.
in
And also
how it accepts ideas.
Also, it's not like, when you go to Europe and you go to the Catholic cathedrals, attendance at Catholic cathedrals in Europe is not, especially in Northern Europe, is not as great as it had been centuries ago.
Yeah.
And in Japan, while I can't speak about centuries ago, I think that in Japan, you still see a lot of spirituality. You see a lot of folks praying at the shrines and the temples, and it's it's certainly more of a spiritual society, which takes me to another point, which is, and I don't know if it's the spirituality that provides this, but the Japanese are very they're very respectful. They're very kind. They I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, but it's a society that is very respectful of each other. If you walk down the street or an alley or what have you, and you see bicycles, and a lot of people ride bicycles in Japan, you won't see any of them locked up.
Really?
Yeah, nobody steals bicycles there.
Is there no market for the bikes, or is it
people don't steal them? We took a cab to our hotel from another location, and we accidentally overpaid the driver, and we were about to get into the elevator in the hotel, and the driver runs in to give us our extra few yen that we overpaid him.
Wow.
Try doing that in New York City, right?
I don't know. If you saw your driver chasing you in New York, you'd run.
We went to a baseball game, which, by the way, I would highly recommend anybody going to Japan to go to a baseball game. It was absolutely crazy. When women or men get up from their seats to go to the restroom or go get hot dogs, which they also eat there, they will leave their bags under their seats.
No.
Without fear of any of it being stolen.
That seems hard to believe. I looked up while you were talking. The average income in Japan right now is about $45,000 compared to about 60 in the US.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's got to be one of the higher. I mean, I think Germany would probably be higher, but that's a pretty significant income per capita.
It is. And I suspect that you've got, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I suspect that there's a lot, that there is some income inequality, based on seeing what folks can afford in Tokyo. I think it's likely to be a Tokyo versus the rest of the country kind of economy.
Is Kyoto, I know I should know this, but is Kyoto the capital?
Tokyo is the capital.
Tokyo is the capital.
It's the everything. It's the governmental capital. It's the economic capital, financial capital. Kyoto is the old imperial capital.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
And it's also the home of a lot of Buddhism, including many of the Zen Buddhist sects grew out of Kyoto. And Kyoto's a seventh largest city. It feels like a smaller city. It's very comfortable. It's not as absolutely crazy as Tokyo is. And it's got a lot of shrines and temples, and including a lot of these Zen Buddhist temples, which are very interesting and very relaxing, the way they've just been designed, especially with their tea rooms. And I would strongly suggest going to Kyoto.
Yeah. So if you only had a week or two in Japan, you'd do less Tokyo and more Kyoto?
I think so. Looking back, I would do more Kyoto and less Tokyo, and maybe a little bit less Tokyo. I'm glad I did two. I'm glad we did 2 and 2 this time, but next time maybe maybe 1 Tokyo and maybe 2 Kyoto and 1 somewhere else.
Did you go to Mount Fuji?
Well, we had a tour set up to go to Mount Fuji, but that day it was raining and cloudy, and there was no way we'd be able to see it even on the tour. So we decided to bag the tour.
Yeah. Did you feel like there was parochial kind of everybody loves Japanese products, or do you think that as a country they have accepted that there are, how do they view Korean goods or US goods or US companies, or do you ever get a feeling for how the people, protect or react to their own companies versus other companies from outside, like China?
I had the feeling that they're economically insular in the respect that you're saying. I don't think that, I don't think it's, 100% by any means. But I think that there's a degree of economic insularity.
We'll be right back.
We hope you're enjoying our episodes. If you are, then we'd greatly appreciate your liking, following, and sharing. Help us help others. Now let's get back to the discussion.
How about getting how about getting around in the train system? Why do you think is it necessity that they just realize cars are ineffective and they have to use trains, or is it culturally I heard they really press them in hard in some of those trains. Did you get sandwiched much?
No, because it's smart to not go during rush hour. So you should be, unless you really want to have that experience, I would say that it's important to sort of work around rush hour in Tokyo. But what's interesting is that when you walk around the streets, they're, interestingly, for a city that may be the largest or near the largest city in the world, there aren't that many cars. There aren't as many cars as I thought there would be.
Really?
Yeah. You know, when you go to some countries, now I'm thinking more like developing countries like Egypt and India. You know, it's absolutely crazy the amount of cars that are around and honking,
Yeah.
this kind of thing. But in Japan, there are relatively few cars. Everybody takes mass transit.
Now, do they
And
have these zones like London where those cars, have to pay a surcharge to get into the main zone
I
or?
believe so. Not
Okay.
100%. I believe so. I believe so.
So that would explain why there's fewer
Yeah.
cars.
And there are tunnels and things of that nature that have electronic pricing, that sort of go from one area of the city to another area of the city. But there's a metro system, actually a couple of metro systems with many, many, many lines. There is something called the JR, Japan Railways, which is sort of a commuter train. Um, and I believe the JR also operates what's called the Shinkansen. And the Shinkansen is the bullet train.
Oh, yeah.
And I always thought the bullet train simply went from, Tokyo to Osaka. But no, the Shinkansen there's Shinkansen that go all over the place. To the north, to the west, to the south. There are a lot of Shinkansen and they go very fast. And,
So they
we
are
were
on a different rail bed, different design, or are they just like a souped up version of the existing train?
whatever it is, it goes super fast. And, you can barely follow the landscape. I mean, you have to, you know, you can follow a landscape that's like a half mile away, but anything closer, it's like a blur. I tried
Wow.
taking video and it's a blur. It is so fast. And you can go from using the Shinkansen, you can go from Tokyo to Kyoto in a little over 2 hours.
Wow.
And that's fast. That's really fast. And there's
Nice.
like 3 or 4 stops on the way as well.
Okay.
So
Man,
yeah, so everybody uses mass transit. It's fast. Um, oftentimes you have to walk a lot between stations underground, and that gives you a nice hefty amount of steps if you want to count your steps.
all right. I mean, I heard the lifestyle and the reason why so many people age well there is, you know what I mean, that they just have such a great attitude about community.
Yeah,
Um,
about community, about the and really the train system is, you could look at that as community.
right. I mean,
They're all traveling.
I don't think it's an accident that the trains and the gardens and things are all things that are enjoyed by many, not one.
Now,
And
another interesting thing, this is my previous business, between the time of my previous business trip, 2018, and this trip, is they've pretty much gotten rid of most smoking. And
really,
yeah, interestingly, it used to be the case that you could smoke. Now, this is going to sound really strange. You could smoke inside, but you couldn't smoke outside in public.
really,
Right. You couldn't smoke outside in public. And I think part of that had to do with litter. They didn't want to have cigarette butts, all over the place. And part of that was the secondhand smoke issue. Inside, you could smoke, like, for example, in restaurants and bars, unless, of course, the establishments had the right to prohibit smoking. And so,
oh,
for example, business offices could say no smoking if they wanted to,
yeah,
but that was the rule. Now you can't smoke inside either. And the only exception to that is that you've got some of these like, smoking zones where you have everybody's behind glass.
nice. I
Um,
mean,
and I'll tell you one more thing. It's kind of interesting. I'm sure everybody has seen these Japanese toilets with the bidets and the electronics and all that. You have, even in the public toilets, you have this button you can push, and it says music, and you push a button, and what it really is static, and the static is so that nobody can hear you doing your business.
Oh, that's
I mean,
interesting.
think of how sophisticated that is.
Yeah. I mean, this is not the right time to mention this, but I mean, I was going to ask you about Japanese gardens because I've tried my own with Japanese maples and akuba and different things. I mean, did you appreciate or do you have like any insights in terms of what to do with your own garden now that you've seen some of the gardens there?
Well, I'll tell you, I like this Zen garden concept, and the beauty of that is that it uses a lot of stones,
Yeah,
and so you don't really have to be that much of a green thumb in order to in order
you
to
just need to be
farm that way.
strong.
Yeah. But I like the use of little pagodas, little concrete pagodas and lanterns and this kind of thing. And I can easily see myself putting something like that up in the backyard.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just kind of there's a custom called I forget what the Japanese words are, but it's called forest bathing, where they've done studies in Japan about people who sit in the forest and just
Yeah.
relax. And they found that if you're in the trees relaxing, it's the equivalent for 30 minutes, it's the equivalent of exercise for 20 minutes.
Well, I mean, personally, I definitely believe in that. I love going hiking and so on. In Japan, the options for that are, there are some big garden areas, big, yeah, big garden areas in Japan. So, for example, in the Shinjuku neighborhood, there's a garden, a gyoen, they call it. Very, very, very big garden. Um, I wouldn't say there are a lot of, I mean, there are trees, but I wouldn't say there are a lot of trees. There's wide open grassy spaces, like huge wide open grassy spaces where people sit out and do picnics. And there's creeks and little bridges and tea houses and just it is very relaxing, even if there aren't 10,000 trees around.
Nice. And how do how can you like characterize, do you think that the economy is good, bad, average? Like, would you say that they're like, did you feel like there was any kind of, sales on this or sales on that, or things that seem to be, companies going out of business? Like, is there any economic observations you have for,
So you mentioned sales. Okay. I didn't see anything that was on sale per se, right? Any clearance sales or anything like that. I didn't see any shops that were closed. Didn't see any of that, or didn't see any shops that were closed. So I think that I think there's a lot of vitality in the at least in the retail economy, which is sort of the visible thing you see at the malls and on the street. There is, it's I'd say it's incredibly vital.
how about the market? Do they have like CNBC or is the market on like the TVs when you go by the stores, or is it, you
No,
know, do you think that people are worried about what their stocks are doing?
I don't think so. No, you don't have this visibility into the market as you would say in Times Square, where you have the rolling ticker.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything like that. And I was in the main areas of Shibuya, Shinjuku, Roppongi, and I didn't see anything like that.
Okay.
So I
And
think
when you
it's
talk about giving up cigarettes, I remember someone once told me that, that their church, everybody didn't drink. And then all of a sudden, everybody stopped drinking, they were smoking all the time at their breaks at the, church. And now, nobody smokes and everybody drinks. Is there like, how much of a, hearty or slash, culturally, where does wine, sake, alcohol, where does that fit in your experience of Japan?
Well, they have a lot of favorite drinks. Obviously sake is a drink that they favor. They love whiskey. They love plum wine.
Oh,
But especially above everything else, they like beer.
really?
Yep.
All right. Do
Yeah.
they have some American home brews or micro
No,
brews?
no, Japan's got enough of its own brews.
Okay.
And supposedly Asahi is the best brand.
Okay.
I can't tell between brands, but I've been told by Japanese that Asahi is the best one.
All right. Okay. So how would you summarize your trip in terms of what you learned as an investor and what you learned as a person and what you learned about what you want to do in the future?
Well, taking that in reverse, what I want to do in the future. Well, I like the idea of taking one long trip per year. And ever since retiring, I basically had done 3 of those. Well, 4 technically. I took the entire summer after retiring and went out west on 2 trips, one to the Southwest and one to the Rocky Mountain West. Big long driving trips. And then a year later, spent 5 weeks in France, in Paris, which I know quite well, but it was good to experience it, more as a tourist, almost as like a kind of a quasi resident, sort of living in an Airbnb on the outskirts. And then this year, 4 weeks, 2 weeks in Tokyo and Kyoto. I don't know what we're going to do next. Before the pandemic, we went to Spain, which is another one of my favorite countries. In the past, I've been to Mexico, Morocco, and through work experiences, I've been to a lot of other countries. And I got to say that there are a lot of countries out there that I would not want to voluntarily revisit.
Okay.
Mainly developing countries. Especially voluntarily revisit on a protracted basis.
Yeah.
But redoing France would be an option. London, I very much like as well. I've been up to Scotland. These are all places that I really very much enjoy. So yeah.
Okay, let's leave it. Let's leave it on a list note. Okay, what are the top 3 places to travel to? What are the top 3 places to avoid?
Based on my experiences?
Yeah. Well, or somebody else in the room there.
Nobody else is here. I would say the top 3 places, in no particular order, are Japan, France, and Spain, followed closely by the UK, and then Morocco and Turkey. Well, Morocco and Turkey is exotic 4th and 5th. I actually really like Turkey, so maybe that would be ahead of Morocco, sort of on the same level as Spain. So let's say Japan, France, Turkey, Morocco, UK. And then in terms of countries that I don't really like, in the past, I used to travel to some really exotic countries. And I would say that among them, I really dislike Venezuela. I dislike Brazil. I dislike Dominican Republic. I dislike Trinidad and Tobago.
All right. You hit your 3.
Yeah. No disrespect to anybody listening to this who may be from those countries, but I suspect some of you who may be in these countries would know what the heck I'm talking about.
No, but I want to announce that Atlanta was our #1 city of listeners, and Singapore has now usurped Atlanta. So all those Atlanta listeners got to get your friends going, because somehow in Singapore we're the hot download.
Well,
So,
I've been to Singapore a few times, and I definitely really like Singapore. The problem with Singapore is that it's not really a great tourist destination because it's so small. There's not a lot
yeah,
to see there.
it's so dense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
all right. Well, thanks, people. I appreciate the listeners, and we especially appreciate our downloads in Singapore. So thanks again for listening to Skeptic's Guide, and we look forward to capturing you with more ideas about investing and living life to the best of your ability. Thank you.
The views shared on this podcast represent the personal investment views of the hosts. They are for educational purposes and not meant to be taken as investment advice. Listeners should consult their own investment, legal, and tax advisors. Past performance of any investments is not a guarantee for future return.